Okay, you guys, thanks for joining online. And I'm going to introduce Nakia Williamson. He is the head of the Nez Perce Tribe's Cultural Department. He's agreed to come kind of talk. One of the reasons I asked him to come up was a lot of times, I've had the question of like, hey, why is the tribe interested in the little salmon? Even in McCall, a lot of times I get that question of like, I didn't know that the tribe had why are they in McCall? What's going, I thought they're down in Lapway in that area. And so I just wanted to have the tribe be able to introduce itself, kind of talk about their history in this area. And there's no better person to have do that than Nakia. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to him and let him kind of tell you about the tribe and the tribe in this area.
All right, thank you everybody, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and share some information. Not knowing a lot about the collaborative, I know the tribe in general has worked in a lot of other collaboratives up closer to or near or adjacent to the Nez Perce Reservation, a couple hours obviously to the north. But I guess I would just come here to try to hopefully share some information in terms of kind of what Wes was saying in terms of just the kind of idea of our connection. You hear a lot about history of ranchers and families in the valley, but also add to that our people had a connection and still retain a connection to this landscape. And so I think that's part of what I hope to kind of accomplish, I guess. This thing kind of acts up. You can click on the screen. Sorry for those that are on virtually here. You're going to get a weird angle, I guess, from me. Kind of look like I'm hovering over you. So again, I work as the director for the Nez Perce Tribe Cultural Resource Program. I think part of what myself as one of the program managers, Emmett and others that work under the tribe, I think trying to reach out in a collaborative framework, I think, and to kind of work with neighbors and find solutions to things that I think are important to everybody. So I think that's something that our executive committee, our council, really encourages us to do. And so I guess part of it is to try to provide some kind of foundational understanding of how we're tied to the landscape, much in a way all of you are tied to the landscape as well. So the beginning of our federally determined identity, which put us in connection through a variety of treaties with the U.S. federal government. Treaties are mentioned twice in the U.S. Constitution, for those of you that are familiar with that particular document. And so the various treaties, our first treaty was negotiated in 1855, and the Nez Perce people wrote into that signing, ultimately was a signing of and us reserving these rights with then Territorial Governor Isaac I. Stevens, because obviously there was no state of Idaho at that time. There was only Washington Territory and Oregon Territory, which included this kind of swath of Idaho. So this treaty was really important to the tribe in terms of which we reserved unto ourselves under those Article 3 rights of the ability to fish, hunt, gather, and to pasture on open and unclaimed land. And that's kind of gone through various iterations through the court system from a long time ago. Another thing that was important in terms of establishing that and given some sort of connection in terms of our people through a bureaucratic process known as the Indian Claims Commission of 1946, docket 175 in the National Archives is where a lot of that is laid out in terms of when the Nez Perce tribe provided a lot of testimony. I got an hour, right? Is that like, okay, I usually only get warmed up in about a half hour, but I'll do my best. So, that was an important, aspect in terms of, establishing our right in terms of how it connects to the various states that came into play, the various other land users and other people that have, obviously are stakeholders in what happens here. So this is kind of just the overview map in terms of, I don't know if you can see that very well, but it kind of shows the blue line roughly approximates the Aboriginal occupied territory of the Nez Perce people. We had a series of villages that are along the valleys, Hills Canyon, Salmon River, main stem of the Salmon River, South Fork, up into, more adjacent to the, the Nez Perce, current Nez Perce Reservation, over into Northeast Oregon, Southeast Washington. And so the first treaty established the red line, which is the 1855 treaty. The green was the successive treaty that led to some conflict that eventually occurred establishing, so that was about a 5.5 million acres, the red, which was the 1855 treaty boundary. And then the green is like the 770,000 acre reservation we currently occupy. And on this map, it shows you that gold ring kind of there is the ICC determination, the determined exclusive use of the Nez Perce people in terms of as it relates to other tribes, basically. So that kind of shows some of that. And you can see the gold line, obviously, in terms of exclusive use. Beyond that is the UNA, the Nez Perce people, because of the use of the horse in particular. We traveled through a vast territory from Willamette Falls, which is named in Nez Perce Willamette, which means bundled all the way out into what is now the Dakotas. So that vast area, our people existed. This gold one was basically determined the exclusive use area of the Nez Perce. So you can see it is in relationship to McCall, Cascade, just falling just outside of that exclusive area. This is another kind of easy convoluted map, but it kind of shows some of our interactions with some of the federal land managers, in particular. I think the 13 plus U.S. Forest Service that we engage with and consult with in a variety of forums, mainly the all forest meeting, which started out as the 3 forests. I think went to 5, the 5 contiguous forests, which the Payette obviously is one, and the Nez Perce Clearwater obviously is another. Our people were moving across this landscape. I think, in terms of, I think a lot of people don't understand that our people weren't nomads. We're moving according and in a very strategic way across the landscape. Like my family, that came, from the Snake River, Hells Canyon area, moved up into these areas, even up in, well, even into modern days. So these winter village sites that were located along the rivers, bends of rivers, where they accumulated driftwood, and they utilized those areas up into the spring when it initiated our gathering cycle, and a variety of ceremonies that we still practice that helps kind of bring into the whole existence the process in which starts our gathering cycle, which begins with the leader, which is for us is what we call Natok, the Chinook salmon. He's the leader, and then all the other foods, and those foods correspond to seasons. Their natural processes, observable processes that we see today, and everything fell in afterwards. So, our people had a long history of a connection to this landscape. Just to the north of here, there's been an excavated site by Oregon State University for a period of over a decade, and they just concluded that work, I think 2 years ago, at the mouth of Graves Creek, which we call Nipaha, again, just to the north off of the Salmon River before it joins the Snake River. And that site had been continuously inhabited up until reservation times for 16,500 years, the oldest site, archaeological site, in the Western United States, older than Paisley Caves in Oregon, by a couple thousand years. For us, one of the original village sites, the 3 original village sites that we came from was on the Salmon River, a place called El Wataspa, known now as French Creek. So, again, this, in terms of how we see ourselves in relationship to that federally determined identity via treaties and these rights, as we know them nowadays, it is important to our modern sort of interaction, and a lot of this has been litigated. Unfortunately, it often comes to that. But beyond that, our way of life that ties us to the land is what we describe as a relationship, which is a more broader thing than maybe you understand the relationship with your family, extended family. Ours extends to the land and to the resources itself, and that's the core of our identity. And so when Lewis and Clark came here in 1805, they found these resources that were here. That was a product of active management by Nez Perce people, to put it in today's terms. For us, it was deeper than that in terms of, it wasn't just a management for maximum yield. It was a relationship where we were part of those natural processes. And so via our gathering traditional practices are not only impacts in which we're taking resources off the land, but we're actually engaged in the process and ecology of many of these plant communities. That's a kind of concept that's hard to kind of illustrate to people, I think, outside of our culture. But this slide is kind of a way that shows the digging of one particular root, a limation root in a spring, in which we dig and spread. That middle part those are the seeds from that root, and they get churned. Same way when you have to go in your garden and work your garden, aerate your soil. That's what's been happening for thousands of years on this landscape. And so, so part of that is a protection of land and resources. But by doing so, we're protecting that relationship that gives rise to us even they're having the ability to call ourselves Nimipu. It's based on those natural processes which we are a part of. And so the protection of those things are really important to us. Of course, water fundamentally is the basis, one of the elemental basis for all life. And when we have our traditional meals, when we start by drinking, I guess similar to those of you that are connected to some sort of church or something of that nature. We drink water as kind of a sacrament, recognizing water is first and foremost. And so that's the first element we recognize when we start our traditional dinners, and then we taste each one of the foods. It's similar to a sacrament, starting with the Chinook salmon all the way down to the last root and the last berry, which for us is the camas and our camas root, blue camas root, which we still harvest, as well as the huckleberry. And so, some of this broader landscape was utilized by my family and a numerous people that currently live on the Nez Perce reservation. They took a trail that roughly followed the river, and there was the trail split right there at what we call Mulpa, what is now Riggins, and it split. One went to the east, and one continued up this way, and went up for another one, broke off at French Creek, came over the top near Patrick Butte and those mountains, and then dropped down into this valley. And in the times of when roads were established, my family, when they had the old time cars, just after the period of the horse, their first camp was at a place called Tiwinispa, which is where Boulder Creek comes into the Little Salmon. Of course, Hazard Creek is another place where our people gathered a particular type of rock we used to sharpen knives and things like that. That was the first camp of my family. And then they came up into the meadow to Yaquispa, the hot springs. And so my family would come into this area, and numerous families go to Paxilitcus or the McCall Payette Lake, down to what is now Cascade, east to Warm Lake, and on over to a place called Totohitspa, now known as Bear Valley, kind of near, obviously, on the adjacent to the Sawtooth area. McCall area, we call Teplohistema, our place of beavers, is a place that my family still utilizes to this very day. And this is, one of our quotes from our elders of times past that talks about some of those rounds that were utilized in times past, but also carried forward today. And so, the main bands that existed in this area was what we call the Lumtama, or those that were residing on the Salmon River and up into the Whitebird Creek area at the mouth. That was where their winter village sites, but they moved up into this area. Then over into the Hells Canyon was where part of my people came, the Picudmu Snake River people that came and lived along. Their main winter villages was at Pittsburgh Landing, and another one further south of there. And so, many of these stories that our people had talk about that time, going back generations, hundreds and hundreds of generations, thousands of years, up into modern times. The top picture is from my own family, and it's taken along the main stem of the Salmon River as they travel up. And in front of the teepee there is my great grandfather, Ben Cloud, and he's talking to, maybe one of your ancestors, I don't know, somebody, one of the local fellas, and they're just, conversing in one of their sites that they would stay. The bottom is my late grandmother, Evie Cloud, at Penny Hot Springs on the South Fork of the Clearwater River. And they're utilizing that place, and that place has been utilized for generations. So yeah, around 1900, our people were still coming up into this area. There was sometimes conflict at the time of the horse, because we traveled with a lot of horses. most of you that know about horses, you don't just get on a horse and travel hundreds of miles. You have to have a string of horses, and our people travel with many horses, and they graze, in some of these areas, which, sometimes cause some conflict. But this is some of the modern uses. Another place, kind of more to the east of here, there was a spur of the trail that broke off past Warren, Bergdorf, where Bergdorf Hot Springs are, over to Johnson Creek, which we call Potoswepa, Big Creek, which is where this is taken. We call it Wala Esquitpa, or a place where the trail follows the creek. And these are some of my relatives taken, I think, in the 1960s, where they're catching Chinook salmon at Big Creek. And these are just some of the family pictures that we had. And this is some of the testimony given by one of our elders, one of my mentors, Alan Slickproo Sr., and talking about the Big Creek area and how it was important to, some of he's naming some of these other elders that are representative of various families that are currently connected to the reservation. Again, I mentioned Tuxpolhistima, a place of beaver, which is what we refer to as the Bergdorf Hot Springs area over into the Warren area. And this is kind of a turn of a century, the last century, of some of our people that they're at the hot springs on horseback, and they're doing trading with people. So this is, fairly early on in the 19th century, and our people were still accessing that area. There's another photo of my family just a couple of years ago of how we fish in the creek that goes in there and joins in with the sea sash. So, these are places that we still engage with, that are still part of our lives, even though there's been a lot has changed from the time when I was a young boy in the 1980s, going there with my uncles. And that was a pretty open area, whereas now there's a lot more, established cabins and whatnot. And, we still, through our treaty, that we reserve those rights to access those streams. And then, as you can see, we're fishing in our traditional manner with the gaff hook, spears. In other places, we use a type of dip net that had been used in times past. And so that's kind of my last slide in terms of that. I think I'm already at 3 minutes here till my end of time. So, basically, I think, what hopefully I try to do today is, talk about some of those connections that we have to this landscape, and that we are part of the conversation as well. Again, the treaty rights that we reserved connect us to this broader landscape, the UNA beyond our reservation, and even beyond the original 1855 treaty, the 1855 treaty. And one of those first slides that I showed was the savings clause, because there's this concept by people outside of tribal groups that, oh, well, another treaty came, so that did away with all your rights. Well, in each one of those successive treaties, there were at least two, there was a savings clause that anything that wasn't specifically dealt with, which was typically issues of land, were still in full effect. And so even though there was a successive treaty after the 1855 treaty in 63, that those rights, those Article 3 rights still were in full effect. And what I've been told by many of our legal counsel and other people that have kind of operated in this realm, that the paragraph or so that makes up Article 3 of the 1855 treaty, that every word of that has been litigated at one point in time, many up into the Supreme Court, as it did, I think, 3 years ago, and won. So again, those are important ways in which we try to engage with federal agencies, the U.S. federal government, but also build those relationships with people that we can, because ultimately, I think our way of life is not preserving life just for us, but it's the basic fundamental of life for everybody. And so, and again, encouraging that our way of life and our culture is connected and derived from this landscape and relationship interaction, where not only it's the benefit to us, but as you could see in the example I showed, the roots and those things that are considered wild plants are actually there as a part of the active management and interaction that the people have provided for literally tens of thousands of years. So I think, part of what I wanted to provide is a little bit of perspective in that regard, and to hear about all the work, and I think understanding that these conversations are often very difficult to have in terms of ways of life that have been established, whether it's your way of life or our way of life. I think the main thing is to move forward in a way, I think collaboratively is important, and try to navigate those issues together and build that trust between communities. I think, and I think what you'll find, at least with the Nez Perce tribe, is we try to work with a kind of good faith effort, and to try to find that common ground with people, whoever they are, whether they're federal agencies that have trust responsibilities via the treaty to the Nez Perce tribe, or individuals. Some of our best relationships that the tribe has established is not because of a piece of paper, a contract, or a treaty. It's because we've maintained relations with an active relationship with a family or with a group that we have an interest in, maybe some of the land that they manage, and they have connections to that too. They remember their grandparents, remember our grandparents passing through and doing the things that we are to help the land regenerate itself, that we have always been a part of. And so I think, I guess if there's I don't know if there's going to be a question Q&A portion. Again, I'm not really familiar with you guys' format in terms of specifically what you guys deal with, trying to get a sense of what you guys are talking about. Seems like it's a vast array of issues. But I think, for me, I guess beyond, the science, beyond, agreements and things that are written on paper, I think just that ability to engage with people and have that kind of face-to-face dialogue, and to understand that the tribe, isn't, I think we're here in good faith to do the best we can, and to work along each and every one of you that are our neighbors now. And so, I think that's kind of the hope, and to try to share just a small, again, most of my presentations are an hour and a half, but I try to squeeze it into this 30-minute period. But if there's no questions, I'm here. So thank you.
Thanks. Let's stand there for a second to see if there's any questions we've got. Any questions for the room? Or on online?
Question. Is it true that the boundary of the original treaty was Smoky Bone Road?
For the 1855 treaty, I'm not familiar with that specific road. So I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's at the north end of the valley. From the maps I've seen.
That could be about right. Yeah, that could be about where it would be, I think.
Do you have any memory or anything of the Indian burial grounds up on the north side of Pollock Mountain, up by Indian Springs?
Well, and that's where I think the relationships are really important. Like for my family, my mother come to the hot springs with our great grandparents, and they would travel through here, on over to Cascade Bear Valley. But in 1945, I believe, my great grandfather, my grandfather, who was connected by marriage, they were arrested because our off-reservation treaty rights hadn't been established by court. So they were arrested, taken to Cascade, and thrown in jail, confiscated their fish, whatnot. And after that time, it kind of, discouraged them from coming to these areas. So there was a break, period of time. And so, some of the landowners may have knowledge about some of these places that, because of that disassociation that's taken place in terms of specific areas, especially on private land, we've lost some of those connections. So, my program, like currently right now, we're dealing with what's called the inadvertent discovery at Soton, Washington, which is off the reservation. So working with the landowner to, basically when they were building a house, they built it in a cemetery, one of our traditional cemeteries. So my staff is currently working on that situation. So, that's the work that my program does. So if you have some additional information that could supplement what our people, may already or may not know at this point, it would definitely be helpful, because those things are the highest concern for us.
Third question. Are you aware of any of the portion history when the sheep eater campaign, Shoshone sheep eater, came in and supposedly had a skirmish over here on the knoll? Is that anything that maybe written in your history, any part of that, of the sheep eater Shoshone being here?
So, Yeah, so the sheep eaters were kind of a Shoshonean speaking people, so they're different, a total, like, the difference between their language and our language is vast. I mean, it's so, even though I think we all fall underneath the idea of Indians or Native Americans, we're vastly different, and they moved up from the south in this area that we already occupied. So I think more of those northern groups that were living in these northern areas, for the most part, we had fairly good interaction with them, but some of those we had, like in the one slide, talked about with those two Nez Perce warriors, sometimes we had clashes with some of those groups, so we weren't always on friendly terms with some of those groups to the south, because they were moving into area that we already occupied. So I can't speak on, probably somebody from the Fort Hall reservation would speak more specifically to that, but those were different people than my people who occupied this area.
I think from what I've read, it was Newport, they came in off Newport. Some of the folks written on that part. Where they came from. Civil Wars on.
That could have very well been, yeah, that's kind of right on the somewhat
Edges.
borderline, yeah,
They would have connected on Salmon River
yeah.
in portions there too.
Mm.
Thank you. You did a very nice presentation.
Well, thank you, appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Do you have any documentation of salmon, Nose Valley here?
In the what?
Salmon in the Nose Valley?
I know our people mostly came up here, came off the trail that came off what was the Salmon River Mountains. We have a different name where we came down through here, and this area is typically where we grazed our horses before moving over into South Fork and the Bergdorf area. So they weren't doing a ton of fishing. The main fishing was happening between the falls. This place, which we call Atespa, which means coming out of a canyon into an open area, referring to these meadows. So where you drop down and where it kind of gets in that little kind of fall area, the area between there and Riggins is where we did primarily most of our fishing in this particular portion until you get, further south.
It just, I heard that originally this was called Salmon Meadow.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a term that we understood it as Salmon Meadows. I don't know if Fisheries has additional information about fishing up in this area.
Most of it
Imagine this.
involves below the falls and very poultry. You'll find in the history books.
Well, we also harvested other, more
Yeah.
local fish. Whitefish were really
Yeah.
important to us, and we didn't just fish Chinook salmon, we fished all the species. So I like your belt buckle. You learn cheap. That's pretty neat. All right.
Any more questions or any questions on Zoom?
Sorry, I rattled through that pretty quick, but half hour is not very long. So
Keep going. Thank you for your presentation.
I'm like a whole horse. I took a while to get going, but all right, thank you.